All right, Quincy, welcome to Unsupervised Learning.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Awesome. What have you been working on? Tell us a little about yourself and what kind of stuff you've been working on.
Yeah, what have I been working on? So this is, I think, week 6 or 7 for me at Chainguard. It's been, sort of drinking from multiple fire hoses, which has been fantastic, and all the stuff that goes along with getting up to speed on a new job. But yeah, a lot going on there. Really, really interested to see what's going on in the software supply chain space. I'd spent, 4 years prior at Redis, super popular open source project, great product behind that. And so now going from kind of one piece of software, one very broad user base, to now a product around open source has been a really interesting sort of transformation for me.
Okay. And what is the primary sort of thing that Chainguard is doing?
Yeah. So if we step back and think about what is open source software and why do we have this, right? And to me, as somebody who's just inherently like a selfish, mean-spirited person, I look at this as just this amazing, strange creation that people will work together to make something for the common good. And I just think that's such a cool idea. But inherent in that also is we have code that we run in super duper sensitive mission critical places that's written by anyone and everyone. And that inherently comes along with its own sort of challenges. The Chainguard CEO, Dan Lawrence, likes to say, open source is free like a puppy. It's not free like beer, right? And who doesn't like a free puppy? And yet it's something you have to take care of. You have to understand it. You have to understand the nuances of its behavior and what you need to do at different times. And when we think about that in an enterprise context, we might say, yeah, we love stuff like that. We love things that are the collaborative, kind of mental product of millions of people all over the world. But what we don't love is that we don't know where this came from. We're not sure if we can trust it. We don't know how to sustain this. And so I think from Chainguard's perspective, the thing that we can do for enterprises is we can bring some more of that trust, some more of that enterprise readiness, some more of the care and feeding that teams need to make this stuff run in those mission critical applications, and help them take this amazing brainchild of millions of people and turn it into something that they can rely upon, that just works behind the scenes so that they can get on with doing the things and inventing the things that they want to go do and invent.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you describe some of the problems that would prevent that from happening?
Yeah, so it's not always clear, and we've seen some great examples of this week with this campaign against NPM, right? Where somebody's going out and compromising NPM credentials, they're uploading dirty versions of libraries and stuff like that, and then it's getting distributed out. That's a great example of the kind of challenges that we face taking open source and turning that into enterprise-grade software.
Yeah. So you've got people basically injecting stuff into these libraries. You've got naming collisions that cause problems, some of them accidental, some of them on purpose. So what is your approach to addressing these?
Yeah, so we do a couple of different things, and there's kind of 3 products in play at Chainguard right now. The first of these, kind of the base one, is containers, right? And if you look at the founding team, right, they came out of a bunch of different container applications at Google, foundational to the creation of Kubernetes, some other technologies. And so that was a great place for the business to start to say, this is a thing that's broadly used, and yet there's a real need to have more trustworthy versions of this. And so being able to build from source, use a hardened operating system or like underlying container image, shrinking that down as small as possible. And what you see as a result of all of these different sort of features that go into the product is you end up with this very small image that both has 0 vulnerabilities in it from the beginning and accumulates CVEs at a much, much lower rate than a traditional image over time. And from there, then we've moved up into libraries, right? So building inherently secure libraries, going back and remediating CVEs, discovering unknown 0 days in some cases, and going and patching those upstream, delivering that downstream to our customers. So we've done that, and we're getting ready to launch that here soon. And then also down into virtual machines, right? Sort of the heavier, full-fat operating systems that people's containers run on top of, that their workloads run in, and things like that.
Okay, so like vertically all the way down to as deep as you can go, all the way up into the application layer, just securing all those different layers. That's really cool. And I guess you said that the container piece is already there. And what is the part you're getting ready to put out soon?
Yeah, so we're doing virtual machines and libraries. And we've got some, kind of early release users on those right now, kind of kicking the tires on those for us.
Yeah, I find this whole thing like super interesting. Like I really wish I could look at an organization and just like see all the software that was installed and then see like the trust level for the entire stack, right? All the way up from the application layer, like down through the different pieces. So it would be the libraries, it would be the virtual machine it's sitting on, on. If you're in a container, then okay, what version of the software do you have installed?
Yeah.
And I want to see, green, yellow, red for that,
Yeah. And I mean, what I would say is even better than seeing it is understanding it's inherently trustworthy from the beginning. And I think one of the problems that Chainguard set out to solve, and something that attracted me to the company when I was looking for my next job, was there's so many ways to scan and visualize and understand where vulnerabilities are. And you think of kind of the earlier versions of scanners. Okay, here's a bunch of bad stuff. And then, well, let's refine that down. And like, which ones of these are really exploitable? What's actually reachable? Is this code actually being used, or is it just sitting here? And all of that is great information. None of that actually solves the problem for anyone. And a few years ago, I did an MBA, which I never thought I would do, right? I'm like, I don't need a degree in teamwork, but actually turned out to be really, really valuable. One of the things I took away from that was this idea of how people buy products, right? In the sense, there's a Professor Clayton Christensen who wrote a really famous article on this. He talked about the consumer buying a product because it solves a job that they have. They hire a product to solve a problem. And you think, what is the problem that I'm hiring a scanner to solve? And inherently it's telling me about stuff that someone is going to have to go fix. And having been a CISO at big, like Fortune 500 companies, at, Redis, much smaller kind of company, you're in this position where you feel like, well, I'm telling people about stuff, and maybe we're running monthly operating reviews and we're going through open vulnerabilities and people are sitting there finger wagging, maybe you're sitting down with a CTO and you're like, listen, we got to get to grips on this and let's see if we can analyze these and kind of find the low hanging fruit in here. And yet all of that is sort of not central to building great products that people love to use, delivering, on a mission that's really important to someone. All of that is toil and noise in the background. And so you look at all of that and you think, well, what if I could hire a product that would just make this stuff go away, right? Because inherently there's no reason we have to do this other than they're just extensions off of the way we've always had to operate. And I love that idea of trying to flip the script on this and just approach this problem of CVEs and vulnerabilities in a different way.
Yeah, so I love what you're saying here. So let me see if I can think about this. It's almost like vulnerability management has been addressing the wrong problem in a set of problems. So if you take what you were just saying, there's one problem of assessing the issues that you have, but maybe that's like an XY redirection of the problem that we think we're solving with vulnerability management, which is the thing that I'm currently running, is it safe?
Exactly.
And that's a separate question of whether or not, do I have vulnerabilities in my software?
Exactly.
And the link between those two problems and the link between those two solutions is not super clear with most solutions that we've had for like the last 15, 20 years, because they're actually mostly addressing the first one and not the second one.
Exactly.
But you feel like you're addressing the second one, right?
Yeah.
You're actually only addressing the first one, and like 90% of your work is still ahead of you.
Exactly. And I think, there's so many different ways we could go with this. I read something you wrote about eudaimonia, right? And the idea of like living a fulfilled life and a meaningful life. And if you've spent any time in security programs, there's a million ways to be busy, right? You can always keep people busy with stuff, chasing alerts, dealing with vulnerabilities, all this kind of stuff. And I think it's healthy as a CISO or a leader in this space to step back and just say, like, what is the meaning of all of this? Are we better as an organization, as a team, as a society for the work that we put into these things? And I will say, admittedly, as a non-developer, non-engineer, when I look at all of the noise and the heartache around vulnerability management at organizations, I just think this is not meaningful work for folks. If we could opt out of this and approach this problem in a radically different way, think of what we could do with all the time and the energy and the money we get back from that to go do something else.
Yeah, I like that a lot. One of the places I worked at, actually lots of different places I worked at, there was this concept of golden images. So it was all part of this vulnerability management problem. And then it was very much similar to what you're saying here, which is, well, how about we just build a relatively secure one, right? A minimalist one, a secure one. It ends up being pretty hard to do for full applications. I think it's easier to do, the smaller the component is, the easier it is to do. And if you build up from there and you make a bigger component out of the smaller components that are secure, then you start to get some progress. But it's really hard to go from this app that was was built 15 years ago and has, thousands of components, and suddenly turn that into a golden image. I mean, do you hear these words a lot? Is this like kind of like a design philosophy?
No, it absolutely is. And it's interesting. I get out in the field and get to talk to a lot of our customers and prospects. And I was chatting with a big financial sector prospect recently, and they have a golden image team. But then when we dug into it, it's like, well, it's not really a golden image team. It's actually a team that does infrastructure delivery, and their customers are other groups within the organization. But as a consequence of that, they're sort of forced to become a golden image team because they realized it was the only way they could scale and serve all of these different customers they have. And yet it's not really work that they want to do. It's work that, being good engineers and like good citizens, they're like, we need this in some way. And, I'm very much of the mind that, you build to differentiate, you buy to scale. And so I think this is a great example of that, where it's like, is having these golden images that you sort of do as your side job a differentiator? No, the differentiator is like the mobile apps that your customers use and like all the cool stuff that you deliver to the other parts of this organization. The scaling part, though, is absolutely something you could buy to solve. And that was a great opportunity for us to come in, not to say like, let's sell to people, but to say like, I feel your pain. Like, let's solve this problem for you so that your team can crack on with the really cool, innovative stuff that actually creates value and actually makes this like a neat place to work where you get to solve good problems instead of one where you're just grinding away, delivering golden images and taking inbounds from people that are unsatisfied with, oh, you don't have XYZ, container image that I need for this new app I'm developing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So give me an example of something that's like an application that everyone's familiar with, and they're familiar with like the challenges of deploying a secure version of it and how that looks in your world versus in the old world.
Yeah, that's a great example. Let's think of something like Nginx, where, you've got this really heavy application. It runs with high privileges. There's just a lot of pieces in there. And inherently, you've got challenges around how to sustain this thing in your environment. When you get Nginx from Chainguard, you're getting it on top of a minimal container image that's had a bunch of hardening done to it. So it's just inherently more secure right there. Then you have known CVEs remediated in that. So you're getting that image that has 0 CVEs in it. And because it has been shrunk down to only the necessary components you need over time, even if you were to just leave it and say, let's just download this, cancel my contract, I'm out of here, just run it, you're going to get something that is going to accrue CVEs at a much lower rate. And you know that when you go in there and you do detect new vulnerabilities, hey, those are things in the application that actually do need to be fixed. They're not sort of like random third-party noise that may or may not be important that you have to spend time sort of digging into. And I think that's a great example of this scenario where what do people want to be doing? What is giving them meaning in their job? Is it going and researching like what CVEs were released and which one of these things are reachable and how much do I care about having to go do this? Or is it, hey, I'm making a great app that's gonna, that's hosted on this server. I need this server to do it, but the server isn't the reason I'm here. The reason I'm here is I'm delivering this great user experience to somebody, and I'm just going to grab these images and move on.
Yeah, totally. And what does that look like for the deployment? So just talk me through this. Somebody has heard about Chainguard, and they're getting ready to install like the vanilla stuff like usual.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a mess. And someone's like, no, you should really install this version instead. So what is the workflow change to look like?
Yeah.
And second part of that is, what does the update process look like? Because inevitably things still decay.
Yeah.
But is it easier to do updates if you're updating the Chainguard version? How does that affect the other stuff on top of it?
Yeah, so we've tried to make that look as much like the way people normally work as possible. And so if you're using something like Artifactory, we're going to connect to your Artifactory, pull those images down, and then you just hit your Artifactory the way you would for, anything you've been using before. We have almost 1,800 images in our library now. So most things people need that are not super duper edge cases we have in there. Mm-hmm. We also have a number of images that are inherently hardened to the DoD STIG standards and have FIPS approved libraries in them as well. And so if you're doing work in the gov IC space, you just inherently get FIPS compliant images that you can go deploy into a FedRAMP environment, for example.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I do a lot of AI stuff. I'm thinking of a cool implementation that I'm just imagining, because I like to do lots of context gathering for a particular requirements for a customer.
Yeah.
So I would love to say, say, oh, I'm about to go into California and I'm under these 19 different regulations or whatever, and then just pull your list of images, which has descriptions, and just be like, and have my AI tell me, oh, well, yeah, you want to use these hardened versions. This is probably how you want to build your images based on the requirements.
Yeah. I mean, that is very much what the future looks like. I asked ChatGPT the other day, I'm like, how much production code is going to be written by AI in 3 years? And it said, well, about 50 to 70% of it, and I've seen another number that said, upwards of 90 in the future. And you think of a world where machines are making decisions on what images are going to get used, what libraries are going to get used, how all this stuff works together. And you think, well, how do I just turn agent clusters loose to go build stuff if there are these sort of nuanced issues that they have to go navigate, and how much easier is a world where we start with sort of inherently trustworthy building blocks and we say, okay, go do your thing. Here's where to get the pieces. You put them together.
Yeah. So I see where this is really cool for standing up new projects. What does it look like for migration of like, you've got this kind of a garbage stack and it's just constant vulnerabilities coming out of it. And you're like, how can I like make a new stack that's like a more secure version, but functionally identical? Like, is there a process for just like doing an inventory of the current thing and then matching that up with the images that would create the new stack?
Exactly. Yeah. So we have a sign-up process that allows people to go do that and to take inventory of what their current stack looks like and then find the corresponding container images in our library. It's fairly straightforward. I mean, if you're refactoring stuff or replatforming and saying, oh, well, it looked like this and now we're going from some like, huge deployment to some kind of microservice architecture we didn't have before, obviously that's like a whole different ballgame. But just a straight, hey, I have these 8 container images I use today. Do you have those 8 container images? That's very straightforward.
And then I guess the takeaway is really just that the initial images, like you said, are going to have no vulnerabilities when you first start. And then worst case scenario, they decay less because of the config that you put on them initially. And then ideally it would be even easier to manage just going forward to actually clean those up, right?
Exactly. And we're building daily, hourly from source in most cases. And so as soon as somebody pulls something down from their, artifactory that's been synced to our pipeline, they'll be getting the freshest image that's out there.
That makes sense. Is there anything around, because I remember there's a lot of complexity around, oh yeah, but I can't use that image because of this config or this version or whatever is turned on or off. Is there any sort of like awareness or like visibility that's available for application builders to make sure that the image that they're using is actually going to still work?
Yeah. And that is a challenge for some folks, right? Particularly in big enterprises where, oh, hey, we can only accommodate TLS version 1 or something like that. And so I will say I have not seen that raised as a huge issue. We're increasingly allowing customers to customize images through a tool we call custom assembly. So you can say, hey, your inherent container image looks like this, but actually I need these extra packages added into it before I pull it down. And we're trying to add functionality like that, letting people add certificates, like their own certificates, into their container images that they pull, and to make this feel like more of a service that can be used across enterprises as opposed to, hey, my team uses this and we use it this way, and as long as you're within these parameters, you're okay. We want this to be as easy for folks to adopt as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Switching gears to sort of like the security leadership side, like what are the things you're hearing from like CISOs in terms of like whether something like this is just a pure security thing or if it actually helps engineering teams? Like, does it enable innovation or is it simply just more security?
Yeah, it's really interesting the way things are going. I have been putting together a thought piece called The Company Without a CISO, and I wanted to pick a title that was a little spicy because I think this job can be sort of silly sometimes. And you think about, well, why are we here? What is the value that CISOs create within organizations? How do we look at what we do? At the end of the month comes around and you think, are we better 4 weeks in than we were 4 weeks ago? And I think this gets at that, right? Like, do we need traditional programs like we've seen around risk management, vulnerability management in a world that is largely driven by AI and what will probably be very personalized AI that allows us to go out and sort of amplify our powers and our will into the world? And on the one hand, I look at how fast we're moving and the sensitive nature of the information that AI needs to be effective. And I think we're moving into a world where security is going to be more and more important than it's ever been before, and where trust is going to be incredibly important. And at the same time, I think a lot of the things that AI makes possible leave traditional security approaches obsolete, and there's a lot of this kind of toil that teams have been doing that we suffered because we had to in the past that maybe we don't need to in the future. And it's sort of bigger than any one product. But you think about something like Chainguard, like, is this a security tool? Is it an infrastructure tool? To me, it's all of those, because at the end of the day, it sort of transcends that. It's delivering an outcome. And I think the best products in the world are products that create great outcomes for human beings.
So what do you think that looks like? Something you said there really interesting. The current programs that we're doing, after we have so much AI integrated, like that program just might not work anymore. It reminds me a little bit of like Harari stuff. One thing that makes me think about that, because I think a lot about the many eyes. You remember many eyes from a long time ago?
Yeah.
How open source isn't natively more secure than closed source because there's more people looking at it. And the mistake was confusing more people being able to look at it with more people actually looking at it.
Yeah.
Right. And so the thing that I think might apply to what you just said is what happens if AI is the one watching everything all the time and then making tiny little tweaks all the time? So a human essentially becomes super slow. Like, how are they looking at all the different pieces of software installed everywhere and their configs and their current state and whether or not they have vulnerabilities and whether or not they're in an ideal state? How many people do you have to hire to be able to do that as humans? What is the return of going from 4 people doing that in a company of 10,000 versus 10 people doing that, 10 humans versus even 100 humans? Let's say you could 10x the size of your team to monitor assets and monitor libraries and monitor packages. It wouldn't make a dent. From 10 people to 100 people, that's 100 people. They have work shifts, they have vacations, they have whatever, versus you deploy a couple million agents and they're always watching. So how do you see just like the role of the CISO or the role of a security team? How do you see that changing in like 5 years, 10 years, or even 2 years?
Yeah, you teed that up really nicely because I do think that's exactly the direction we're going in. And I look at where AI is already making a difference in security practice, right? You know, agentic SOC tooling going out and like, hey, this can triage every single alert that comes through. We used to talk about, well, we're only going to look at the high priority ones. We're only going to look at ones that impact production or whatever. And now it's, you know, almost trivial to just say, yeah, of course everything gets triaged. Of course we look at every single thing that comes in. And, you know, on the AppSec side, there's some really interesting startups are doing stuff around threat modeling and things like that, and being able to look at code that's being written and provide input on PRD documents and architecture designs and things like that. And you think that used to be a huge bottleneck for companies, right? And there was all this talk about, well, maybe we can get a team in a best cost labor market and we'll hire people there and then they'll do all these manual reviews and threat model with our engineering teams and blah, blah, blah. And now you think, oh, we could threat model every single feature that ever gets created at scale and just bubble up stuff when a human needs to handle an exception. And so the ability to do some of this routine work at, you know, an infinite scale should mean that at the end of the day, we get better security outcomes. And yet, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm still left a little bit wanting because I think inherently there's something different about security. There's a human being on the other side of the table. It's not like it's the weather, you know, and oh, here comes another storm and we just sort of suffer it, right? There's somebody on the other side of the game board who has a mission, who has a goal, you know, maybe it's financial, maybe it's, you know, a national security goal, but they are sitting there moving the pieces and you don't know as a defender how many pieces they have, what their moves are going to be. And so to the extent that we come in and we take these kind of steps. Now, you know, agents are reviewing all of the alerts. Now agents are helping us threat model our products. Someone is there looking at that and saying, how do I get in the middle of this? How do I circumvent this process? How do I get my mission done in this new context when these traditional routes of intrusion are not available to me anymore? And so people are always going to be needed here. I think as we see in so many other places that AI is disrupting, what probably happens is some professions become less important. They become more commodified because they're being done by agents. Some become much more demanding, and the premium that people that can do those jobs well can command becomes much higher because there's only so many people that have that kind of expertise and have that experience who can step in and say, okay, given that all of these, you know, attack paths are taken away, where do we need to defend and what needs time and money and planning and what can we set to the side?
Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, the way I learned that was first order versus second order chaos. And it was the same example. The first order chaos this is the weather is chaotic, but the weather doesn't adjust to your adjustment to the weather.
Exactly.
Whereas the attacker does. The attacker makes a move, you make a move. It can see your move and say, oh, well, I guess I won't do that anymore. I'll do something else. And I also agree with your assessment that it's fewer people probably overall, but they have to be far more senior. It has to be more design based. It has to be more, it's really the human versus the human on the other side. And then you're building your AIs to fight against each other, but you still have to feed something to the AI to say, here are the adjustments we need to make strategically. Because ultimately, at least for the time being, the AI is going to be implementing and executing, not designing and, changing the system overall. Yeah, I find that really interesting. The other thing I find really interesting about what you guys are doing is I use this analogy a lot of building with AI, and people are talking about, well, it's going to be really nasty and people are just building slop or whatever. And it's true. Stack Overflow is full of slop, right? I mean, it's because humans were making slop. That got put on the internet as like, here's the official thing. Well, you copy and paste that, it's got a buffer overflow in it. You copy and paste that, it's got SQL injection in it, right?
Yeah.
So that was like the known way of building something. And when people emulate that, they produce garbage. Well, if you scale that production of garbage by giving lots more people tools to build with Cursor or whatever tool, well, you're going to get garbage. But what's cool and optimistic for me about this whole thing is that I think within a year or 2 or 3, AI is going to refuse to build without good pieces. It's not going to take that piece from Stack Overflow. So if I say, hey, I need, Nginx stood up and I need, the following modules to go on top of Nginx or whatever, and here's my tech stack, it is literally going to be like, okay, well, we're not going to start from scratch from Stack Overflow. We're going to go and do extensive research to find the most secure way to do this, and it's going to refuse to build without using secure components. So I think it's natural for it to be like, let me get the secure container version of Nginx. Let me get the secure container version of these different libraries. Like whatever the most secure option is, it's going to assemble with that stuff. So I think it will get worse before it gets better because people are still building with the bad stuff now. But the more people who catch on to this start secure or start in a more minimalist, secure way and only build using those components, it's going to start getting much better because AI is much better at following the instructions. Because, and this is the crazy point, security was always supposed to be part of quality. Quality was just supposed to have been what you were doing, and security should come along for the ride. And the way I describe this is you go to like a skyscraper construction project. You can't ask the foreman to talk to the department for this building not falling down because it turns out nobody there actually knows how to build a skyscraper. What they're doing is they're following instructions. So what the AI is going to do is it's going to follow instructions for building secure software. And guess what that's probably going to include is building with secure libraries and secure containers for the packages.
No, that's exactly right. And I want to shout out to the least helpful Stack Exchange post I think I've ever seen when I was trying to solve a problem for myself. And someone said, well, it works fine with the driver I wrote myself, with no link to like where the source code was that you could go take, and I just thought, thanks for that. If that's where AI is getting its information from, we're in a lot of trouble. But no, I think that's exactly right. And it is a sort of a perverse place we've gotten ourselves to, where in so many organizations, you go and talk to the folks that are building stuff and they say, well, I never learned how to do this securely. Like they don't teach this where I went to school. Or, well, I need someone else to come in here and help me make this secure. And you think, where else in the world do we accept that someone who is an expert in something knows how to do a piece of the job like that, but not, we would never talk to a surgeon and say, well, hey, I just do the surgery, I don't do it safely, right? And yet we allow people to build systems that have, in some cases, like life-threatening potential to them, who have not been trained in how to do that securely. And I don't think that's a failing of those individuals. I think that's a failing of how we as a society have decided to set about educating and training people for these kinds of roles. And I think also devaluing the role that technology increasingly plays in society, which is one that is life and death. And the more we trust machines to make decisions for us, the more we have to feel confident that there actually is trustworthy components under the hood of those systems.
Yeah, I just thought of something cool. So my system, I've got a system called Kai. It's like a full AI infrastructure that I can kind of build anything with. You know what I would absolutely love? I would love if I told Kai that I want to build so-and-so stack. And I said, oh, by the way, there's a reference here. Here's a GitHub link. This GitHub link has a whole bunch of public. It's actually build schematics similar to the skyscraper. If you want to build this type of skyscraper that has two main pillars and like a T across the top for like a platform or whatever, or if you want to build it's got underground parking, like all these different things that people want to build.
Yeah.
All these different software stacks that people want to build. It's Node.js, it's Java based, whatever it is. And then you guys publish the actual components that are needed to make that and how they interconnect.
Yeah.
So it's like full build rollouts, right? And not necessarily everything that is in the build you guys provide might be like, look, you have to go get this one from source or whatever, because we don't have that one yet. But 80% of the others, you could use our libraries, you could use our containers, you could use whatever. Yeah. And then my AI would just like go and pull those and build with that. Think of how much that would help the internet build more securely.
No, I think that's the way the world is going. And the more that we are asking machines to make those decisions for us, the more we need those trusted components under the hood to make sure that what comes out the other side is something we feel good about. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I would love to. Do you guys have anything like that, like a GitHub that has build schematics or something? Are you guys thinking about that or putting it out soon? Or
we have some stuff out in open source, so you can find a version of our container image, Wolfie, out there that people can build on top of. Of course, also being a business, there's some things that we like to keep to ourselves. Sure. There's some things that we put out for the public, but I can share a link here if people want to go check out what we've got out there for our Wolfie repo and stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, maybe there's like an open source version where it's just the schematic of the stuff you need to build.
Yeah.
And then there's another secure version or whatever, or like the Chainguard version, where if they just enable that and put in their key or whatever, now you're pulling the actual repos. Yeah. Now you're pulling those actual containers. Because I would love to use something like that. Well, cool. What's coming out soon? Like, how can people learn more about you?
Yeah, so I'm always on LinkedIn for my sins, and as Quincy Castro, so they can see more from me there. Got some travel coming up. I'll be in London for Gartner Symposium in November, out in New York for our Assemble conference in March, and doing a lot of little one-offs in between here and there. So
awesome. Well, it was great chatting with you, and looking forward to seeing what comes out soon.
Thanks so much for having me on. This has been great.
All right, take care.
You too. Bye.